heard a cute story about a preacher who goes to a bar, and in the bar he starts proclaiming the word, preaching about the gospel and the importance of following Jesus and giving your life to the Lord. And after he does that for a time, he says, well, now everybody that wants to go to heaven, draws a line on the ground, come and stand over on this side. And of course, everybody there feels very convicted, and immediately they go to the other side, except for one man. And the preacher's a little puzzled by this, and he says to him, sir, don't you want to go to heaven? He says, well, yes, I want to go to heaven. He says, well, why don't you come on this side then? He says, well, I want to go, but just not right now. Well, we all want to go to heaven. Everybody wants to go to heaven, and I think it's probably true, just not right now. We don't want to do that right this minute. A little bit later in the future sounds like a good time for us to go. Well, the scholar of the law, the lawyer sometimes he's called, had the same desire. He too wanted to go to heaven. He wanted to be saved, and he inquired, well, what do I have to do in order to go to heaven? Seems like a legitimate question. What is my obligation? What are my duties? How can I achieve this great state of heaven? And it does reveal that we think about heaven and about hell as a form of eternal reward. Either we're rewarded for the actions that we have and enter into heaven, or we're condemned for our failure to live up to what we're expected to do and go to hell because of that. And I wonder, do we still believe that? Is that true? Is this something that resonates with people? Do we think that our actions have those temporal actions have eternal consequences? Well, the church would say very strongly that even one mortal sin that we have not repented of, I think that's key to underline there, that we don't repent of that mortal sin, can lead to our eternal damnation. And a mortal sin would be any action, behavior on our part that separates us from God. Obviously, this is something that is very serious, something that we willingly do, that we are understanding what the implications are, and we make that choice anyway, despite the consequences that would come to us in our life. And of course, this would be a very wrong act because it separates us from God, and this the effect of mortal sin is to separate us from God. And this ultimately frustrates our human existence. To quote again, I know this is a famous quote of St. Augustine, that he says, "O Lord, you have made us for yourselves, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." We are restless until we rest in the Lord. No matter what else we may have, what else we can achieve, all the material benefits, whatever blessings this world has, or the good things that are here, they would never satisfy us if we ended up separated from God. Well, I think contemporary theologians have probably rightly started to question, well, how culpable are we for our actions? How much are we responsible for the choices that we make? We've traditionally said that once we reach the age of reason, which was pegged at the age of 7, we become capable of sin. Reason, you have to have reason to be able to make a reasonable choice. And therefore, you're capable of committing some grave act. And one of the reasons that we ask children to begin going to confession at that age is because of that. Probably also tied in why we withhold communion until they're able to make this reasonable act. But I think I think most people would come to the understanding that maturity is something that develops, doesn't just immediately fall at the age of 7. It's something that grows and develops over a great deal of time. And it seems unlikely to me, and I think most people intuitively recognize that a 7-year-old, maybe for many years after that, can't be quite capable of making such a radical decision in their life, that they wouldn't be as culpable. But it's not so hard to see that in childhood, but what about as adults? We recognize more and more how we're affected by our culture, by our conditioning, by the circumstances that we are in, by the habits that we have fallen into, all kinds of things that can diminish our freedom, diminish our culpability. It's very hard to judge these things, and ultimately only God can judge. Only God can be the one that can understand what is going on in somebody's heart. But we should recognize that if we're not capable of sin, we're not capable of good either. If we can't do wrong, we can't do right. We have to have the freedom to do both things. And so it's a little bit of a paradox here, or not that it can't be broken, because either you're free or you are not free. Well, we recognize, even within our own self, sometimes our lack of freedom, our lack of ability to respond to the call. Well, so the question about what do I have to do to enter into heaven, the consequences of my actions, I think is an important and a lively one. But Jesus, I think at the basis of this story is saying that the answer can't be in legalism, in a certain number of obligations that a person has. This, I think, is at the heart of the scholar's question. He wants to know what he has to do. What are my obligations? And this, in a profound sense, reflects the kind of legalism that drives him in his life. When Jesus turns the question back on him, he does give a very profound answer, doesn't he? Jesus himself will say these are the two fundamental laws that we have to fulfill. Love God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and love our neighbor as ourselves. And this is a very profound answer that the man gave. But he can't leave it at that. He wants to know precisely, well, who exactly is my neighbor? And then Jesus tells this beautiful and famous story of the Good Samaritan, one that we can all relate to. And I think the title itself just becomes an indication of how we are to treat other people. But it's an interesting story because I think Jesus' answer is, but you're thinking about it in the wrong way. You're thinking about things to do. And the right answer is to love. You can't just define this as a legal obligation. And he says two people fail in their duty, the priest and the Levite. And when you think about that story, Jesus could have used other titles, couldn't he? He could have said a royal official was going down and failed to do it. Maybe a farmer failed to do it, or a Roman soldier, or a rich man came along. And any one of those could have been another official who failed to do his duty. But he uses the title of the priest and the Levite. Maybe it's coincidental, maybe it's something I'm reading into it, that these two would have been the ones to fulfill the law. They would have been the ones to do what the law said they were supposed to do. And they failed to really fulfill the heart of the law, which is Jesus' point. Fulfilling the law is not the point of salvation. It's not what leads to salvation. It's being a loving person. It's the person that loves that is really fulfilling what that law calls us to do. And so the problem with legalism is ultimately it's self-centered. When I'm thinking, what do I have to do to save myself? And that's the problem. It's not what you do, it's God's action within you, even though I recognize we do respond to it by our choices. But our self-centeredness can never be the source of salvation. The Good Samaritan, who doesn't live within the law, lives within the law of love. And that becomes his salvation. Our actions do have consequences. The choices that we make do impact our lives and obviously the lives of other people. They can lead to heaven and hell. But it's our actions motivated by love or not by love that really matter.